Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. I work with a lot of individuals who have attachment wounds, and predominantly I work with dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance, leaning dismissive. I notice a lot of misconceptions about these folks, and I think it's important to recognize that by having some of these misconceptions, you are unable to understand what's truly happening in your relationship, or you're unable to truly heal from what could have happened to you. I think sometimes it's easier to hear things that are easier to swallow about what happened. And it's just because relationships are complicated. And so today I wanted to go over some of the myths, 4 myths, and I guess lies, not really lies, but that's a shorter word, about avoidant individuals, okay? This is going to be a triggering video for a lot of you guys, and I do want to say everything I say, take it with a grain of salt. It's very important to recognize every person is different. Just because all of these things can happen. It's just more commonly people use this as as something that's much more common than it actually is. And I'll give you an example, and that's actually the first one, and then we can kind of unpack all of these details. The first misconception that I see with individuals who are avoidantly attached is that they left because they love you too much. Now, that can be true, but there are normally plenty of other factors that made this individual leave that has nothing to do with their love for you. Now, could they have left even if they love you? Yes, that's probably a little bit more common. But as I've mentioned in quite a bit of my other videos, avoidant individuals do not value love necessarily as much as individuals who are securely attached or anxious or even fearful if they're leaning anxious. And so an avoidant individual could very well leave you even though they love you, but that's not always the reason they left. Usually it's because of something that triggered them, or I would say the most common reason is because for whatever reason they felt like it wasn't going to work out. And that could be because of many different things. It could be that they feel like you guys are incompatible. They could feel like it's because maybe you guys are coworkers. It could be nothing to do with your actual factor. It could be that you guys have different upbringing, whatever the reason is. But avoidant individuals, they take these aspects more seriously than another person, because a lot of individuals, and it's healthy, even if anxious individuals think this way, it's typically healthier, they tend to believe that relationships are worth adjusting and saving, right? This is normal. It's healthy. However, avoidant individuals, they don't always perceive it that way. They are much more leaning towards their own independence. And so they have this perception. It's a limiting belief. It's actually maladaptive, and it comes from the neglect that they've experienced. But it also comes from the fact that they suppress their feelings. They believe relationships are not supposed to have that much work involved. And so when they see a lot of these barriers, let's say you guys come from different parts of the country. Maybe you come from the West, they come from the East, whatever it is, right? Different states or different countries in general, different cultures. Maybe you guys are coworkers, or you used to be coworkers, or you guys grew up in the same town together and you guys went off separate directions, and they're looking at those factors as maybe this relationship is not going to work. Maybe they love you, but that's not typically always the reason that they left. It's likely all of these other variables to which maybe they hold on more specifically than you do, which is why you're confused by the fact that the relationship ended even though there wasn't that much of an issue. To you, there wasn't much of an issue, but to them, because they believe relationships are supposed to be easy, or they're not supposed to have this many barriers in their mind, they think there's so many barriers, right? That could be why they left. Another reason is because the relationship was very volatile, or there was a lot of arguing, or there was a constant repetition of negative feelings. Avoidant individuals don't like a very negative atmosphere. Actually, this is really common, and I see this if I'm working with families. Let's say I have an avoidant parent, and maybe their teenager or whatever is in session, and I can see in a family session that their families also tell their kids, like, don't be sad, like, show a brave face or be positive. I don't like when you're, negative. And so you can see that they were taught that positivity, a lot of avoidants use positivity as some sort of avoidance. And you can see in relationships as well, if the relationship feels too negative, they may perceive this as, okay, something's wrong, it's not going to work out, okay? But this is something that needs to be healed at some point. typically in long-term relationships, you should see healing, because relationships will have a moment where there is a lower time, right? Where it's not as positive. You have difficult times. I had one couple I was working with recently, young couple, right? They're close to my age. And they just recently got married and they're planning on having a child, and they both are aware of their attachment issues, which is not very common for couples that are young, in their 20s and getting married, but they are aware of it, and both of them have their healing journey. But you can see that the new issues that are coming up with new pregnancy, moving, whatever it is, that is causing a lot of issues in the relationship, which is normal. But the avoidant individual, the avoidant partner in this pair, they are starting to feel like the relationship maybe isn't worth it anymore, even though they just recently got married. And I see this a lot. So this is not like a one specific case, but they're starting to feel like, okay, I feel like this is my deactivating strategy, or I feel like it's maladaptive, but like, why am I feeling this way? Why do I feel like the relationship is like doomed to fail? Why do I feel scared of that? Why am I uncomfortable when all these pressures are coming up? I feel, like I want to run. I feel like this relationship is set up to fail. We are more irritable with each other. Does this mean that all love ends in breakup? Whatever it is, these are like the negative thoughts that are showing up in session, right? And these fears are normal and they're valid to some extent, but most individuals who have these fears, they don't stick to it as prominently. And avoidant individuals, especially when there's a lot of pressure going on, and this is another reason why they can leave, so much pressure and maybe things are moving too fast, they might feel like, okay, I'm losing my independence. What is going on? I'm really afraid that maybe this relationship really is not meant for me because I don't feel like I'm myself. I have to buy a house now. I have to start saving. Now I have to take out a life insurance policy for a newborn. Like, I'm very confused. I'm frustrated. I don't even know if I wanted to do this. And so the reason that an avoidant individual leaves is usually numerous factors. Maybe you just can't see it because it's not something that you would even think about. But that's something to recognize, okay? The next one is a myth that avoidants cheat to sabotage their relationship. There are plenty of avoidants. First of all, just in general, a lot of avoidants who do not cheat. I used to be avoidant, and I was avoidant for my entire life, and I have never had an issue of cheating. I've never done that. I've worked with a lot of avoidants who don't have this issue, but a lot of times if an avoidant is cheating on you, maybe it's because they're sabotaging, but it could be because the general reason why people cheat. Now, what is the general reason that people cheat? From what I've read in research and what I've seen for my patients, the general reason is because their needs are not being met. Now, this is not an excuse, because what happens a lot of times is a person who does not know how to articulate and make prominence to their needs, they end up not getting those needs fulfilled. Maybe they're not aware of their needs. And so you can see this happen sometimes with avoidant folks, more commonly with fearful avoidant, but it happens with all attachment styles, actually. Cheating. But that doesn't mean that let's say your partner did cheat on you. It's not always because they're trying to sabotage the relationship and they're feeling suffocated. It might be because their needs are not getting met. Maybe it's because they're trying to sabotage the relationship, but that's not as common. And like I'd mentioned, not all avoidants cheat. And so this misconception keeps people in situations and they're not healing. Because if your partner is cheating and you think it's because they're sabotaging the relationship and you're trying to heal their trigger, when in actuality, it's not the trigger, it's their lack of needs being met, they're not going to end up stopping cheating, or it's not going to be as easy. Or you might be staying in a relationship that's not beneficial for you because you're not recognizing the root cause. And it's hard to admit these things. It really is. And I'm not saying this is always the case. So please understand that it's very well possible that someone could be cheating on you to sabotage the relationship and they really are happy and they didn't mean anything by it. But it's also important to recognize it might be something else. And it's just important to cover all your bases so that you don't waste you or your partner's time when you could heal together in a way that's more accurate to what's really going on, okay? The next one is similar to the first one, where there's this assumption that avoidants leave as soon as the relationship gets more real. Now, there is some truth to this, but it's not always true. Most avoidants are fine as long as there isn't too much pressure. Now, the difference is, and this is why you can see this happen, because it does happen. I'll explain what's really going on from a psychological standpoint. A lot of people, when they fall in love or when the relationship gets very real, the other person, even the avoidant partner, expectations start increasing. You're expecting to see each other more. You're expecting maybe you guys will have a timeline of when you move in. Maybe you're expecting to get married someday. This is why the avoidant individual leave. Yeah. The reason why this is important to distinguish is because that means you can have a real relationship with them as long as there's not as much pressure. And this is actually one of the most common triggers in general for avoidant individuals. So that means you can have a loving and romantic relationship as long as the steps to getting connected are more spaced out and the expectations are less. The experience of love automatically becomes less overwhelming. And so avoidant individuals do not feel as triggered. Now, of course, that means that you won't get what you're expecting as quick as you want. That is true, but that's the other side of it. If you feel like the relationship should be moving along and you feel like you have to pressure, it's either you adjust your expectations, your partner changes and starts leaning more in, or you realize you guys are not compatible. That's really important as well, okay? And the fourth one. This one particularly, I feel like a lot of people don't understand, and that's why I'm going to bring it up. And I think it's important to highlight. A lot of people think the solution for avoidance, like their emotions, their triggers, everything is to always give them space. That's just not always true. Like avoidant individuals are human. Sometimes they're telling you, I'm mad, or like maybe they're upset about something. I'm upset about this. I'm really frustrated right now. That doesn't always mean, okay, I don't want to touch, I don't want to step on your toes. I'll just give you some space. That's not always the case. Maybe they actually just want to talk it out. It happens. Or they just want to move on from this topic, but you can still text, you can still plan a date with them. They'll still come over. They just don't want to talk about that particular negative aspect. And so there is no expectation of space at all in this conversation that I just made up off the top of my head, right? Space is not always a solution. And the reason why I think this is important to recognize is if you always think space is a solution, you're not getting close to your partner the way both of you deserve. If you're putting space in the relationship where it's not needed, you're wasting precious time you guys could be connected to one another. So how do you know the difference? Communicate it. Hey, do you need space right now? Or I feel like this topic was pretty stressful. I think we should take a pause on it. What do you think? Are you still willing to come over tonight? Just have a conversation. I know it's scary because you don't always want to hear what your partner truly has to say, but it's important to move over these barriers so you can connect as a couple. So those are the 4 lies, the top lies, misconceptions about avoidance that a lot of you guys get wrong. I hope this video was helpful. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.